We knew little more than that about it, but we were probably going to be moving out the following morning. Surprise would be to put it very, very mildly. We were flabbergasted.
By the evening of the second day of battle, the Allied commanders understood the enormity of their situation. 25 German divisions were on the attack, against only 4.5 U.S. divisions. Eisenhower and Bradley reached for the only reserves they had, the 82nd Airborne and the 101st. The 101st were paratroops. They'd led the way in Normandy and then Holland. They figured their next action would be the triumphal jump into Berlin.
We were told by PA systems, you know, broadcasting, you would hear it. They'd come down the street and say all airborne, and that meant everybody airborne, not only 101st, but anybody else. And it was to get back to your outfit, no questions asked, right now. And if you didn't, within so many hours, they'd pick you up and escort you back. And they told us to get everything ready to go, and we didn't know whether we were going to jump or what was going to go on. It was sort of a hang situation. So we just, when we got back to camp, then we found out. And of course, we didn't really know until we got in the trucks and they said, you're headed for Bastogne. Well, where's Bastogne? You know, we weren't even sure where it was.
The main fight now was for 22-foot strips of pavement, the major roads, most of which ran through two towns, Saint-Vith in the north and Bastogne in the south. 250,000 Germans, plus tanks, jeeps, horses and trucks, squeezed through the Ardennes. Generals stood on their staff cars for hours directing traffic. While the remains of the American front retreated, the Wehrmacht moved on to Saint-Vith and Bastogne at a crawl.
Well, we were told to move out and move into Bastogne. I mean, we were spread out on each side of the road right into a battle formation. All along the road, you would see dead guys, you know. You could hear the guns going off, you could hear the Germans firing, you could hear a little bit of small arms, and it sounded like it was, oh, maybe 2 or 3 miles away or kilometers away.
The scene at 18th Corps headquarters in Bastogne was one of semi-organized confusion. The Germans were at the gates, almost literally, and that the Corps headquarters was bugging out. Were moving to another location because they didn't want to be overrun.
I saw people coming back. They had a look of, well, I've been beaten, but I don't want to be, and a confused, glassy-eyed look. I mean, they were sort of dazed like. And you would ask them a question, what's happening? And they really couldn't tell us. They really couldn't tell us because they didn't know it happened so fast. And then some of them were just plain scared. I mean, they were just, they'd had it. I mean, they didn't know what to do. I remember one young guy kind of jogging along and slogging along. He had no weapons or anything, and he was actually crying.
The 101st dug itself into the fields and forests around Bastogne. Its job was to hold the town. To the far north, SS tankers had broken through. They were searching frantically for gas reserves. Americans kept a fragile grip on Saint-Vith, but in the soft middle, the Germans had split the line wide open. On the 21st, the first day of snow, Bastogne was surrounded. Heavy clouds grounded the American bombers. C-47s loaded with supplies sat on runways, unable to reach the town.
We want what you call well repaired to go into a winter situation. I mean, we had a supply of normal combat fatigue type things, but that's about all we had. Gloves and things like that we didn't have. Footwear was mainly what we needed. We had combat boots that had the buckles on the side. We had those, and we needed something to cover them because we had worn those through Normandy and Holland, a lot of them, and they were worn pretty thin, see. Some of us had even cut holes in them for air where we'd impregnated those things with that gook we used to put on them to waterproof them, see? And your feet would sweat in those things, so we'd cut holes in those. Well, that was a stupid thing to do going into Bastogne because the snow would get in there and like that. We had limited ammunition, and that was one of the things, too, that we lacked was ammunition. We just didn't have time to get supplied full ammo.
Bastogne needed relief. General Patton's army was 100 miles to the south. George S. Patton had a sense of history and the will to make himself a place in it. He was already preparing his main chance, an attack that could propel him into Berlin. When he got wind of the German breakthrough, he feared Ike and Bradley were going to steal away his troops to plug holes in the Ardennes. But it didn't take him long to recognize an opportunity for glory. He told Ike he could pivot most of his attack force within 48 hours and sent word to Bastogne his army was on its way.
On the 22nd of December, when we were totally surrounded, some German officers under a white flag of truce came into our glider regiment with a paper demanding our surrender and telling us all the bad things that would happen if we didn't. And we went in to General McAuliffe, who was taking a little much-needed nap at that point, and General McAuliffe mistakenly thought that this was some Germans who wanted to surrender to us. But we disabused him of that thought very quickly and said, no, they want us to surrender. And Tony McAuliffe then said, us surrender? Oh, nuts. And then he went on and he said, well, I wonder if we ought to answer him, and we all felt that it required an answer. And I spoke up and said, well, what you first said would be hard to beat. And Tony said, what do you mean? And I said, you said nuts. So he took a pencil and wrote to the German commander, nuts, exclamation point, A.C. McAuliffe, commanding. When the surrender ultimatum was learned of, it was apparently a good morale booster for the American public. The American press every day was showing a picture of the Bulge with only Bastogne in the white, and all the rest of it was German, and we were still holding out, and that was about the only good news there was.
Bastogne n'avait strictement aucune importance.
The town of Bastogne had no military importance. The proof of it was in the plan of attack. There wasn't even a plan to take the town itself. The Germans got taken into the game. Once they saw Bastogne was becoming for America a symbol of resistance, then the Germans set out to destroy that symbol.
Hitler made it plain to his commanders, Bastogne must be taken. He released every spare man to the cause. German artillery flattened the town. Tanks and infantry attacked from every side. There was no way to evacuate the American wounded. Medical supplies were used up. Doctors operated behind makeshift curtains. For anesthetic, they used cognac. This growing drama was not lost on Patton. He radioed ahead. He would crack through on Christmas Day.
Patton was a rather mercurial kind of a guy, very flashy. They used to say that he was the best ass kicker in the United States Army.
From his command post in Luxembourg City, Patton ordered his men to attack night and day. His army neared the southern flank of the Bulge at a gallop. But 2 days before Christmas, the weather upstaged him.
cleared, and the planes could start flying again. Planes were coming over by the hundreds. You'd see 36 in a group, 36 more, 36 more, and I don't know how many hundreds. And we just look up at the sky and say, thank goodness they are flying again.
And see those guys diving down and strafing. We knew they were hitting tanks, and that's just keeping the crowds moving and keeping them busy. And this happened from daylight to dark.
Hitler had gambled everything in the Ardennes. His best troops, his new...
We knew little more than that about it, but we were probably going to be moving out the following morning. Surprise would be to put it very, very mildly. We were flabbergasted.
By the evening of the second...
Ask right now, and if you didn't, within so many hours, they'd pick you up and escort you back. And they told us that get everything ready to go, and we didn't know whether we were going to jump or what was going to go on. It was sort of a hang situation.
Day of battle, the Allied commanders understood the enormity of their situation. 25 German divisions were on the attack, against only 4.5 U.S. divisions. Eisenhower and Brad to Berlin.
We were told by PA systems, you know, broadcasting, you would hear it. They'd come down the street and say all airborne, and that meant everybody airborne, not only 101st, but anybody else. And it was to get back to your outfit, no questions.
They reached for the only reserves they had, the 82nd Airborne and the 101st. The 101st were paratroops. They'd led the way in Normandy and then Holland. They figured their next action would be the triumphal jump in